Most people have a plan for a fire drill. Almost nobody has a plan for what happens when the grocery store shelves go empty and the trucks stop coming. Wars don't announce themselves with 2 weeks' notice. Historically, supply chains collapse fast, sometimes within days of a conflict starting. The people who are fine are the ones who prepared before the sirens. So if war starts, do these 15 things, and you won't be hungry for 10 years. Thing 15. Stockpile white rice immediately. White rice is the closest thing to a perfect survival food that exists. It's calorie-dense, nutritionally flexible, extremely cheap per serving, and, if stored correctly, it lasts virtually indefinitely. The USDA and food storage researchers at Brigham Young University conducted shelf life studies on white rice sealed in oxygen-free containers and found that properly stored white rice retains acceptable taste and nutrition for 25 to 30 years. That's not a typo. Nearly 3 decades. Brown rice is nutritionally superior. It retains its bran layer and has more fiber and vitamins. But that same bran layer contains oils that go rancid. Brown rice has a shelf life of about 6 months at room temperature and around a year if refrigerated. In a long-term crisis, brown rice is the responsible choice that betrays you at the worst possible moment. White rice doesn't do that. For storage, the method matters as much as the quantity. Rice needs to be sealed in airtight food-grade containers. 5-gallon buckets with Gamma Seal lids work well, with oxygen absorbers inside. Oxygen is what allows mold, insects, and rancidity to develop. Remove it, and you've essentially put the rice in suspended animation. One adult needs roughly 1.5 to 2 cups of dry rice per day to cover basic caloric needs from rice alone. At scale, a 50-pound bag of white rice costs very little and provides hundreds of servings. This is your foundation. Everything else builds on it. One more thing worth noting. Rice is familiar. In a crisis where almost nothing is normal, familiar food matters for morale and for children's eating habits. You can get someone to eat rice and beans for weeks. Getting them to eat unfamiliar emergency food they've never seen before is a different conversation entirely. Stock what your household will actually eat. Thing 14. Learn to grow food, not just store it. Stored food has a ceiling. A garden doesn't. If a conflict drags on, and historically they often do, the people still eating well after year 2 aren't the ones with the biggest pantries. They're the ones who figured out how to produce food from the ground while everyone else was calculating how many months their stockpile had left. Growing food isn't complicated, but it does have a learning curve, and that curve is significantly steeper when you're hungry and stressed. The time to learn is now, while failure just means buying produce at the store. Focus on high-calorie, high-yield crops first. Potatoes, sweet potatoes, winter squash, dried beans, and corn. These are the crops that historically fed populations through hardship, not because they're glamorous, but because they store well, grow reliably, and provide serious caloric density per square foot of garden space. A single potato plant can yield 2 to 10 pounds of potatoes per season, depending on variety and conditions. An acre of potatoes historically produced enough calories to sustain a family of 4 for a year, which is precisely why the Irish economy became so dependent on them in the 18th and 19th centuries, and precisely why the 1845 blight was so catastrophic. In wartime, those who had gardens ate. Those who didn't stood in lines. A survivor of the Siege of Leningrad, documented in the 900 Days by Harrison Salisbury, 1969. Start with containers or a small raised bed if you have no experience. Seed saving, collecting seeds from your harvest to replant the following season, is the skill that makes a garden a renewable food system rather than just a one-season experiment. Thing 13. Store dried beans and legumes. If rice is the foundation, dried beans are the walls. Beans provide protein and fiber, 2 things white rice doesn't deliver in meaningful quantities. Together, rice and beans form a nutritionally complete diet that has sustained populations across Latin America, Africa, and Asia for centuries. The combination provides all essential amino acids, enough calories for sustained physical activity, and the fiber necessary for digestive health. Dried beans, kidney, black, pinto, navy, lentils, split peas, stored properly in sealed, oxygen-free containers can last 25 to 30 years, similar to white rice. Lentils are particularly valuable because they require no soaking and cook faster than most other legumes, which means less fuel consumption, an important consideration when fuel itself may be scarce. 1 pound of dried beans yields roughly 6 cups of cooked beans. That's 6 servings of substantial protein for the cost of a single can of soda. The only real catch with beans is water and heat for cooking. Long simmering beans require sustained fuel, which may not always be available. Pressure cooking dramatically reduces cooking time. Lentils go from 30 minutes to under 10. This is worth thinking about when you're planning your cooking setup, which is addressed later in this list. Thing 12. Build a seed bank. Stored food is finite. Seeds are renewable. A seed bank is a collection of non-hybrid, open-pollinated seeds, often called heirloom seeds, that can be planted, harvested, and replanted season after season without the seeds losing their viability. This is the critical distinction from hybrid seeds, which are bred for one-generation performance and either won't germinate from their own seed or produce inferior offspring. The difference matters enormously in a long crisis. If you plant hybrid tomatoes and save the seeds, next year's plants may not produce reliably. If you plant an heirloom variety, a Brandywine tomato, a Cherokee purple, an Amish paste, and save seeds correctly, you have those seeds indefinitely. Seed storage is straightforward. Seeds need to be dry, cool, and dark. Moisture is the primary enemy. Seeds stored in sealed glass jars with silica gel desiccant packets in a cool, dark location can remain viable for years. The exact duration varies by species. Onion seeds are notoriously short-lived at 1 to 2 years. Tomato seeds can remain viable for 4 to 6 years. Some varieties, stored under ideal conditions, remain viable much longer. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, opened in 2008, currently stores over 1.3 million seed varieties from around the world precisely because seeds are recognized as a form of insurance at the global level. What nations do at scale, households can do in a closet. A practical home seed bank should prioritize vegetables that produce abundantly in a short growing season, store well, and provide genuine caloric or nutritional value. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and zucchini cover fresh eating. Dried beans, winter squash, and corn cover caloric density. Leafy greens, kale, Swiss chard, spinach, grow quickly and address vitamin deficiencies faster than almost any other garden crop. Herbs like basil, parsley, and dill don't contribute many calories but do extraordinary things for morale when the food situation is monotonous. Thing 11. Secure a water source and filtration system. Food gets the headlines. Water is actually the more immediate problem. A human being can survive weeks without food. Without water, the timeline is 3 to 5 days, less in heat or with physical exertion. And in a conflict scenario, water infrastructure is frequently one of the first things disrupted, either through direct damage, power failure at treatment plants, or contamination. Municipal water treatment in most developed countries depends entirely on continuous electrical power to pump, filter, chlorinate, and pressurize water through the distribution system. Grid failure means treatment failure. Treatment failure means the water coming out of your tap, if it's coming out at all, may not be safe to drink. The multi-layer approach to water security involves storage, collection, and filtration. Storage means filling large food-grade containers now, while the water is clean and pressurized. A family of 4 needs roughly 1 gallon per person per day for drinking and basic sanitation. More in heat. Large 55-gallon drums are the most space-efficient storage option for serious quantities. Collection means having a rainwater harvesting capability. Even a basic barrel under a downspout adds meaningful capacity in areas with regular precipitation. Filtration means owning a quality gravity-fed water filter. Brands like Berkey and Katahdin have documented track records in field conditions, capable of removing bacteria, protozoa, and many chemical contaminants without electricity. These are not the same as simple activated carbon filters. Know what your filter actually removes. Thing 10. Store salt, sugar, and fats. These 3 ingredients don't get enough credit in survival planning, and their absence is how an otherwise well-stocked pantry becomes a joyless endurance test that destroys morale. Salt is not just a flavoring, it's a preservative, Before refrigeration, salt was the primary method of preserving meat, fish, and vegetables across virtually every culture on Earth. Salted and dried meat, salt-brined vegetables, salt-cured fish. These are food preservation techniques that work without electricity and have worked for thousands of years. Salt also has direct physiological importance. Sodium is an essential electrolyte, and in high activity or hot weather scenarios, salt depletion becomes a medical issue. Sugar preserves through osmosis. High sugar concentrations draw water out of microbial cells, preventing spoilage. This is why jams, jellies, and candied fruits last for extended periods. It also provides quick-release energy and is a significant morale booster, which matters more than most survival guides acknowledge. Fats, in the form of coconut oil, ghee, or freeze-dried butter, are calorie-dense and essential for fat-soluble vitamin absorption. Coconut oil, refined and stored in a sealed container, can last 2 to 5 years at room temperature. Ghee, clarified butter, stores for 1 to 2 years at room temperature and longer when refrigerated. Both are far more shelf-stable than regular butter or vegetable oils, which go rancid relatively quickly. A combined stockpile of salt, sugar, and shelf-stable fats also gives you the building blocks of food preservation in their own right. Salt for brining and curing, sugar for jams and syrups, fat for confit, the technique of preserving meat submerged in its own rendered fat, which was the standard method of preserving duck, pork, and rabbit in European households for centuries before refrigeration. These are not novelties. They are functional preservation systems waiting to be used. Thing 9. Acquire and learn to use a pressure canner. Home canning extends the shelf life of almost any food, meat, vegetables, fruit, soups, stocks, to 1 to 5 years without electricity. There are 2 types of home canning: water bath canning and pressure canning. Water bath canning works for high-acid foods, tomatoes, fruits, pickles, jams. Pressure canning is required for low-acid foods, meats, most vegetables, beans, soups. The distinction is important for safety. Low-acid foods, canned improperly in a water bath, create conditions favorable for Clostridium botulinum, the bacterium responsible for botulism. A pressure canner reaches temperatures high enough, 240 degrees Fahrenheit, 116 degrees Celsius, to destroy botulinum spores. A water bath does not. The National Center for Home Food Preservation, operated through the University of Georgia, maintains tested, peer-reviewed canning recipes and processing times. These are not suggestions. These are food safety standards developed through scientific testing. Following them matters. A quality pressure canner, an All-American or Presto, both American-made and widely available, costs between $100 and $300 and lasts decades. It's a one-time investment that gives you the ability to preserve garden harvests, bulk meat purchases, and foraged food indefinitely. Thing 8. Store honey. Honey deserves its own entry because its storage properties are genuinely extraordinary. Archaeologists have found honey in ancient Egyptian tombs, over 3,000 years old, that was still edible. This is not hyperbole. Honey's chemical composition makes it almost impossible for spoilage organisms to survive in it. Its low moisture content, acidic pH, and natural production of hydrogen peroxide create a preservation environment that no bacteria or mold can comfortably inhabit. The one condition honey requires for indefinite storage is keeping it sealed and dry. Honey is hygroscopic. It absorbs moisture from the air. If moisture enters the jar and raises the water content above roughly 18 to 20%, fermentation can occur. Sealed and stored correctly, honey does not expire. Beyond storage, honey has practical applications. It's a natural wound dressing with documented antimicrobial properties. Medical-grade Manuka honey is used in clinical settings for wound care. It's a sweetener, an energy source, and a flavoring agent that makes otherwise monotonous emergency food palatable. In a scenario where morale matters, and it always matters, honey is quietly one of the most valuable things in your pantry. Thing 7. Get a reliable off-grid cooking setup. All of the stored food in the world is considerably less useful if you can't cook it. Modern kitchens are entirely grid-dependent. Electric stoves need the grid. Gas stoves, even pilot-free modern ones, need electricity for the ignition system and, in most cases, rely on municipal gas infrastructure that can itself be disrupted. In a conflict scenario, assuming the gas and electricity will keep working is an assumption with a poor historical track record. Off-grid cooking options range from simple to substantial. A propane camp stove with a stock of propane cylinders is the simplest entry point, functional, familiar, and available at any hardware store. The limitation is fuel storage. Propane cylinders run out, and resupply may not be available. A wood-burning rocket stove is a more durable long-term solution. Rocket stoves are designed for combustion efficiency. They burn small-diameter wood, sticks, branches, scrap wood, at high temperature with relatively little smoke, using much less fuel than a conventional fire to accomplish the same cooking task. They can be built from cinder blocks or purchased as manufactured units, and they function indefinitely as long as there's wood to burn. A solar oven is worth having as a supplementary option in sunny climates. A quality solar oven can reach temperatures of 250 to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, 120 to 175 degrees Celsius, enough to bake bread, cook rice, pasteurize water, and slow cook beans, using nothing but sunlight. Thing 6. Store vitamins and medicines. This is the item most survival lists underserve, so it gets the attention it deserves here. A diet of predominantly stored staples, rice, beans, grains, canned goods, is calorically sufficient but nutritionally incomplete. Fresh produce provides vitamins C, A, K, and folate in quantities that stored foods simply cannot replicate. Without these, deficiency diseases emerge. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, begins to show symptoms within 4 to 12 weeks of inadequate intake. Night blindness from vitamin A deficiency and a range of neurological problems from B vitamin deficiencies are documented outcomes from populations subsisting on monotonous stored food diets. A supply of high-quality multivitamins, particularly vitamin C, vitamin D, especially in conflict scenarios where sun exposure may be limited, B-complex vitamins, and zinc, costs very little and addresses the gap between a surviving diet and a healthy one. Beyond vitamins, a basic medicine stockpile should include over-the-counter analgesics, antihistamines, antidiarrheal medications, rehydration salts, antiseptics, and any prescription medications for conditions that require ongoing treatment. Supply chain disruption affects pharmaceutical manufacturing just as it affects food. People who take regular medication need to think carefully about this. Oral rehydration salts deserve a specific mention. Dehydration from diarrheal illness, which becomes significantly more likely when water sanitation is compromised, has killed more people in conflict zones than many other causes combined. Oral rehydration therapy, developed in the 1960s and refined through decades of field use by organizations like the WHO, is one of the most effective and low-cost medical interventions available. Pre-packaged rehydration salts are cheap, lightweight, and shelf-stable. They belong in every emergency kit. Thing 5. Learn basic food preservation without technology. You can grow it and you can harvest it. Now you need to keep it. Drying, fermenting, smoking, salt curing, and root cellaring are the 5 food preservation methods that have sustained human populations across thousands of years of history. Long before refrigeration, before canning, before any of the modern systems that currently handle this problem invisibly on everyone's behalf. Drying removes moisture from food, denying spoilage organisms the water they need to function. Sun-dried tomatoes, dried herbs, jerky, dried fruit. These can all be produced at home with nothing more than a food dehydrator or, in suitable climates, direct sunlight and airflow. Dehydrated food is lightweight, compact, and shelf-stable for 1 to several years depending on the food. Fermentation is arguably the most powerful of these techniques. Lactofermentation, the process behind sauerkraut, kimchi, traditional pickles, and kefir, uses beneficial bacteria naturally present on vegetables to preserve food in an acidic, shelf-stable state. The process requires only vegetables, salt, and a container. No heat, no electricity, no equipment beyond basic kitchen supplies. Properly fermented vegetables can last months to years and provide probiotic benefits that support gut health, genuinely valuable when medical care is limited. Smoking and salt curing preserve meat and fish through a combination of moisture reduction, salt penetration, and in the case of smoking, antimicrobial compounds deposited by the smoke itself. These techniques were the primary method of preserving animal protein before refrigeration and remain effective today with a modest investment in equipment and knowledge. Thing 4. Build community, not just a bunker. The lone wolf approach to survival sounds compelling until you do the math. A single person, or even a single family, cannot produce enough food, maintain adequate security, provide adequate medical care, and sustain all the other functions of daily life simultaneously. This is not pessimism, it's basic logistics. Throughout history, the basic unit of human survival has been the group, not the individual. Communities have survived catastrophes that individuals and isolated families did not. Historical examples are consistent on this point. During the Second World War, communities that organized food production cooperatively, victory gardens coordinated at the neighborhood level, food preservation done collectively, resources pooled, managed food security far more effectively than isolated households. The Dig for Victory campaign in Britain by 1943 had an estimated 1.4 million allotment plots in production across the country, a national-scale collective effort that meaningfully supplemented food supplies under severe wartime rationing. The practical implication is, know your neighbors now, before you need them. A community where people trust each other, share skills, and understand each other's resources is vastly more resilient than the same number of people living in the same physical space with no established relationships. Skills matter here as much as resources. A neighbor who's a nurse is worth more than an extra stockpile. Someone who grew up farming knows things that can't be learned from YouTube in a hurry. Lawyers, mechanics, carpenters, teachers, every skill set becomes a community asset in a prolonged crisis. The social infrastructure, the trust, the relationships, the reciprocal obligations has to be built before the crisis, not during it. People are far more willing to cooperate with and support neighbors they already know. Strangers showing up at the door asking for help in a crisis get a very different reception than neighbors who've already established good faith over months and years of normal life. This is one preparation that requires nothing more than being a decent neighbor. Sebastian Junger's 2016 book Tribe, On Homecoming and Belonging, explores exactly this: how people in wartime communities and close-knit military units develop mutual dependence that modern civilian society largely lacks. His core argument is that humans are fundamentally wired for collective survival, not individual survival, and that the absence of community is itself a form of vulnerability. That observation applies just as directly to a neighborhood preparing for crisis as it does to a military unit. Thing 3. Secure physical cash and trade goods. Digital money assumes an infrastructure that may not be functioning. In conflicts that disrupt power grids, banking systems, and internet connectivity, all of which have been targeted in modern warfare, electronic payment systems stop working. Credit cards, bank transfers, digital wallets, none of these function without the underlying infrastructure. Cash works as long as the currency retains value. And before a currency collapses entirely, physical cash almost always has a window of usefulness. Beyond cash, certain physical goods have historically functioned as currency in post-collapse environments. Alcohol, tobacco, ammunition, batteries, coffee, chocolate, and medicine are consistently documented as high-value trade goods in conflict and post-conflict economies. None of these necessarily need to be things you personally consume. They're trade assets. When the money stopped being worth anything, cigarettes became the currency, then coffee. People bartered for what they needed. The ones who had things others wanted were the ones who got by. A Sarajevo survivor of the 1992 to 1996 siege quoted in Furfall's The Modern Survival Manual, 2009. This isn't cynicism, it's documented economic behavior in every major conflict zone from the Second World War to the Balkan Wars to more recent conflicts. Physical goods retain utility value when fiat currency doesn't. Having a modest supply of high-demand consumables is a reasonable hedge. Thing 2. Store whole grains and a manual grain mill. White flour has a shelf life of 6 to 12 months before it goes stale. Whole wheat berries stored in sealed, oxygen-free containers last 25 to 30 years. The difference is that whole wheat berries are the complete seed, with the bran and germ intact, which means they need to be milled before use. This is where a manual grain mill becomes one of the most valuable pieces of equipment you can own. A quality hand-operated grain mill, Brands like Country Living or Diamont have long-standing reputations among homesteaders, can convert whole wheat berries, corn, dried beans, and other grains into flour without any electricity. Bread is more than nutrition. Bread is morale. The ability to produce a loaf of real bread from grain you've stored and milled yourself, in conditions where almost nothing is normal, is worth more than its calories. This is not an exaggeration. Accounts from wartime civilian populations consistently describe the smell and taste of real bread as a powerful psychological anchor. Corn is worth including alongside wheat. Dried field corn, not sweet corn, stores as well as wheat berries and can be ground into cornmeal, mesa, or hominy through a process called nixtamalization, which involves treating the corn with an alkaline solution, traditionally lime water. Nixtamalization was developed by Mesoamerican civilizations thousands of years ago and significantly increases the nutritional availability of corn, converting it from a food that causes niacin deficiency to one that doesn't. Thing 1. Make a plan before you need one. Everything on this list is significantly more useful if you've thought about how it fits together before the moment you actually need it. A pantry full of rice and beans is an asset. A pantry full of rice and beans with a clear inventory, a rotation system to prevent anything from expiring, a cooking plan that accounts for off-grid fuel, a water supply calculation, and family members who know where everything is and how to use it. That's a system. The difference between an asset and a system is preparation. War and civil disruption don't follow tidy timelines. The siege of Sarajevo lasted 1,425 days, nearly 4 years. The residents who thought they were preparing for a short disruption had consumed their supplies within weeks. The ones who genuinely planned for an extended scenario were in a categorically different position. A written plan doesn't need to be elaborate. It needs to answer a few core questions. How many people are you planning for? How long are you planning for? What are your water sources? What are your cooking options? What do you do if you need to leave your location quickly? What comes with you? Document your inventory. Know what you have, where it is, and when it was stored. Rotate stock regularly, using and replacing older items, so nothing quietly expires on a shelf while newer stock sits in front of it. This sounds mundane. It is mundane. Mundane systems work when everything else is falling apart, which is exactly the point. The last question, mobility, gets missed often. A bug-out bag, a vehicle with fuel, and a destination isn't a paranoid fantasy. It's what the people who successfully evacuated conflict zones had prepared. The ones who couldn't leave quickly enough sometimes couldn't leave at all. Preparation is not about fear. It is about reducing the number of decisions you have to make under pressure. Lawrence Gonzalez, Deep Survival. Who lives, who dies, and why? 2003. Take the time now, while everything is still fine. Because when it isn't, you won't have the time. None of this requires a doomsday obsession or a fortune to implement. Most of it is just old-fashioned common sense that several generations managed to forget once supermarkets made thinking about food supply feel unnecessary. The average American household currently has less than 2 weeks of food on hand. That's not a judgment. It's just a fact worth knowing about yourself. A war starting is not the only scenario where this knowledge becomes useful. Supply chain disruptions, natural disasters, economic crises, the same preparations apply. Being ready isn't about expecting the worst. It's about not being helpless if it comes. If this gave you something useful today, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find content like this. And subscribe if you want to keep building on it, because there's more where this came from. Stay ready.